Okay, so what I wanted to talk to you guys about was the imperfect tense today. And I think what I'd like to start with is just going over the uses of the imperfect, and then we'll go back and we'll talk about how to form it. So the imperfect tense is used to portray various aspects of the background of a story, details about the context in which the story takes place, such as the time, the date, the place, the weather, etc. One other use of the imperfect is when you're giving the hour, when you're telling at what time it was when something occurred, that's always in the imperfect tense. When you talk about the weather, if you are just telling me what the weather was like yesterday, you would use the preterite past tense. But if you are setting up the background for a story in which the weather is not the information that you're conveying, it's setting the mood for the information that you're conveying, then you would put it into the imperfect. So like, for example, if I was saying it was a dark and stormy night when there was a knock at the door, the knock at the door is going to be in the preterite, but that dark and stormy night, that's not what I'm getting ready to tell you. That's just setting up the background, so it's putting you in the mood, ready to hear the rest of my story. So if you're using your weather to set the mood or the tone, then you put it into the imperfect. It was, hacía mucho frío y llovía. The condition and description of the people in the story. So when you talk about, so estaba muy cansado, me sentía mal, no llevaba anteojos. And I'll get into this. It's a little bit more confusing, but I like to think of it as, we have two types of verbs. We have action verbs and we have state of being verbs. So hold on, I can write on here. Okay. So we have action verbs, and your action verbs are something like things like run, jump, dance, sing, okay? And then you can have states of being verbs, which are like want, need, hope, have, desire. Okay, so when they're talking about a condition or description, if it's a verb like, or even was, or if it is a state of being verb, those tend to go into the imperfect, and action verbs tend to go into the preterite. Now there are some exceptions to that, but what it's trying to say here is description of people. That's going to be a state that the people were in. Let's see, what else was there? Okay, to contrast the things are now and the way they used to be. So whenever you say used to, you're always going to be using the imperfect. So, ahora hablo español y portugués, antes solo hablaba inglés. So now I speak Spanish and Portuguese, but I used to only speak English. So if you're going to use, if what you're trying to say in Spanish translates to I used to, you're going to be using the imperfect. Antes tenía muchos amigos. Before, I used to have a lot of friends. Ahora solo tengo dos o tres. So if you're contrasting what's going on, how things are now and how they used to be, the used to be goes into the imperfect. And then this is where we were talking about those action verbs. Those action verbs, these guys, run, jump, dance, sing, tend to go into the preterite tense unless there's something in there that implies that you did it repeatedly. So if you did it repeatedly, the action then has to be put into the imperfect. So if it says, when I was a kid, we used to go to school by foot, or we used to walk to school because there were not school buses. So when you're implying that you did this over and over and over, you're going to have to put it into the imperfect. Antes no salía nunca de noche, no me gustaba. In the past, I did not go out at night. I didn't like it. So I guess when they're saying this antes, they're kind of like, before, back when I was a kid, I never used to go out at night. I didn't like it. Okay. And so if we go back and we want to look at how to form it, and then we'll talk about contrasting it with the preterite and the imperfect. When we try to form it, remember that there's two parts to your verb. That you always have and you have an ending, and that ending lets you know whether you're going to use AR endings, ER or IR. And again, just like in the preterite tense, you can see how, whoops, I won't use that one. You can see how the ER endings and the IR endings are the same. So unlike in the present tense where they differ, in the preterite and the imperfect, they're the same. So when you conjugate verbs, you're going to keep your stem, and then for all AR verbs, these are the endings that you would add for the preterite tense. And for all ERs and IRs, these are the endings that you would add. So if I had, like, for example, another verb, desear, then the stem is dese, so I would dese, and then I would start adding these endings. So I desired deseaba, you desired deseabas. So you can see how I'm adding that ending. Whoops. I'm adding the ending that you see over here that goes with, so tú deseabas, él y usted deseaba, nosotros deseábamos, deseabais, and deseaban. So you can see how this AR verb has the same endings as hablar, and you could do the same thing if you were dealing with comer. Then it would be comía. Whoops. Comía. Comías. Whoops. Comía. Íamos. And comíais. And then comían. Whoops. So you can see how I kept the stem. The stem for comer is C-O-M. I kept the stem and I just added the ER-IR endings. The stem is dese. I kept dese and I started adding the AR imperfect endings. And luckily for the imperfect, we just went through the preterite. We had tons of irregulars. In the imperfect, there are only 3 that you need to remember. And really only 2, because ser and ir are completely irregular. But bear, it's only irregular in that it keeps its E in the stem, which really is part of the ending. So all you've got to remember with bear is that you keep the E, okay? And so then, okay, so let's just go through and do an activity where we're conjugating the verbs in the imperfect tense. So we don't have to make a choice yet, we just have to conjugate. So María, tocar, trabajar en la tienda. It makes most sense that she would be working at the store, so we would pick trabajar. And when we do it, this is the verb ay, ay, ay. Okay, so we have trabajar. This is the ending, the AR, so we take that off, but that AR tells us into which column to look, and it's Maria who's doing the working. Maria is the same as she, the same as ella, so it's aba. So we would make it trabajaba. Rosario y Ana ir or ver de compras todos los fines de semana. It makes more sense that they go shopping than that they see shopping every weekend. So we're going to have ir. Ir is an irregular, and it's Rosario y Ana or they. So we would put iban here. Okay. Tu ver leer la televisión mientras hablabas por teléfono. Makes most sense that you'd be watching TV instead of reading TV. Ver is another irregular, and if it's you, here's you go across. There's ver, you would put veías. Okay. Cuando nosotros estar niños, siempre jugábamos en el patio de la casa. Makes most sense to be ser when we were kids, or when we used to be kids. You wouldn't want to do estar, because remember, estar is how you feel usually, and it's your location, neither of which matches here. So we would put, and it's irregular, so here's where are we? Nosotros, and there, so it should be éramos. Éramos niños. Cuando éramos niños, siempre jugábamos en el patio. And you'll see that a lot when you're trying to say when we were kids, you're going to see, or when we were young, you're going to see era in that expression. Todos los hombres llamar traje o corbata. It makes most sense that they were wearing, not calling, a suit and a tie. So we put the verb llevar. We keep the stem, we get rid of the AR, and over here are my AR endings, and so I would put all the men. That's the same as they, so it would be llevaban, okay? And so that's how we would form the imperfect tense.